Chapter 1. Then you will have success if you are careful to observe the decrees and laws that the Lord gave Moses for Israel. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged. First Chronicles 22:13. Sunrise of the great Australian Bight. The bright yellow orb of the rising day star glistens on the ocean's rippling surface. Standing on the stern of the Alcyon, the Cousteau Society's famous windship, I place my hand against a gigantic plastic cylinder. It is 10 feet tall and 5 feet in diameter, and feels a little flimsy. This is not reassuring at all. I think to myself as I knock experimentally on the thin plastic wall, then peer at my reflection on its shiny, warped surface. I notice that the slightly distorted image of myself looks a little concerned, maybe even a bit worried. Over the plastic's distortion of my shoulder, I see Jean-Michel Cousteau walk out of the bridge door carrying a white porcelain cup of steaming tea. His reflection joins mine on the cylinder's plastic wall. "So what do you think of the world's first all-plastic shark cage?" he asks proudly. "I wish it was a bit thicker," I respond, knuckling it again. More for Jean-Michel's benefit than mine. He leans over and gives the cylinder a solid wallop. The thin plastic wobbles, causing our reflections to shimmer and dance. "This isn't just plastic. It's super tough Lexan," Jean-Michel says proudly. 3/8 of an inch thick Lexan has been known to stop a .38 bullet, but this Lexan cage is only half that thick, and a .38 bullet weighs only an ounce, I answered nervously. "I want to know if this thing will stop a 3,000 pounds super predator." "Don't worry. Don't forget that the bullet has a lot more velocity than a great white shark," laughs Jean-Michel. "Besides, I'm planning on giving it the tuna test." "Tuna test?" I'm not sure I heard him correctly. Jean-Michel grins and takes a large slurp of his tea. "Yeah, tuna test." 2 hours later, Michel Delory, our cinematographer, and I jump from the stern of the windship into the open hatch of the floating steel shark cage. Peaches, an 18-foot long great white shark, immediately comes over to investigate. She peers through the viewing slots in the upper sides of the cage, then chomps down on one of the corners and gives the steel bars a vigorous shaking. Keeping one's balance inside a shark cage that is bobbing with each passing ocean swell is challenging, particularly when wearing slick rubber booties on a smooth metal grate. Having a 3,000-pound shark knocking the cage about makes standing in one place almost impossible. Currently, Michel Delory and I are both attempting to stay in the exact center of the cage, the farthest point from those clashing teeth. Fortunately for Michel, he is doing a better job of it. I balance off two of the cage's wire mesh walls, half flooding my dive mask in the process. I urgently want to clear the water out of my mask, but that requires the use of both my hands, which are currently protecting the underwater camera I'm holding. Peering my popically through the distortion of the seawater, I see teeth the size of my thumb industriously shredding paint chips from the cage inches from my face. The shark worries a few more feet of the sturdy steel bars like the ever-hungry capkin going after a corncob, then turns away. Its massive tail slams against the cage as the super predator charges after another great white shark. 2 staggering steps later, I regain my balance, quickly clear my mask, then realize that besides a rational level of fear, I'm also feeling slightly seasick. The water visibility isn't very good, as I feel my stomach rumble in protest at the constant movement of the floating cage. I see only about 30 feet into the gloomy water as I watch the 2 great white sharks swim in and out of view, with one usually in pursuit of the other. Michelle looks at me and grins. As always, in dangerous situations, he is having a good time. I try to steady myself inside the still bobbing cage and make a conscious attempt to suppress the nauseousness of my growing seasickness. Inside, I burp and taste an unpleasant acid taste tang inside my regulator. Looking up through the shimmering surface, I see the crew beginning to lower the plastic cylinder into the water, which immediately commands Peach's attention. She swims around it twice, eyeing the nearly transparent cylinder suspiciously. The huge shark nudges it once with her snout, but the lifeless plastic cage doesn't seem to hold much interest for her. That is, until Jean Michel drops a 40-pound frozen tuna into it. That's when things begin to get positively exciting. Peach's behavior changes dramatically because she really wants that tuna. The big shark begins swimming vigorously around the cylinder, looking for a way to get at the tantalizing fish. The tuna's arrival brings in 2 more great white sharks, charging in from opposite directions. Seeing all the abrupt shark activity, Michel Delory decides it's a good time to film with the front door open. Having the cage door wide open means Michelle can get unrestricted shark footage. This type of cinematography is critical if our films are to be dramatic and exciting for our viewers. Since Michelle needs both hands to operate the movie camera, it falls on me to hold the door open for him, which requires that I lean outward through the narrow opening and tilt my body to one side. This allows Michelle to position his camera over my shoulder. Glancing nervously behind me, I notice that the large bulk of the underwater camera will be an interesting obstacle in reference to me getting back inside the cage in an emergency. That realization contributes significantly to my heart rate. Feeling the blood pounding under the snug hood of my wetsuit, I silently hope that things don't get too exciting. Abruptly, a fourth shark begins swimming rapidly upward from beneath our cage. Michelle can't see the oncoming super predator because he is peering over the camera at another great white shark torpedoing in and out of the gloom. I want to yell a warning, but there is a little problem. Underwater divers can't talk, except for grunting or the occasional scream into the regulator. All communication must be made through hand signals and body language. With my faceplate several feet beyond Michelle's camera lens, I cannot turn to see him. All my attention rivets on the ascending shark. 2 loud grunts into my regulator don't seem to get Michelle's attention, so I resort to the scream with a lot of head nodding in a downward direction. My antics instantly get Michelle's attention. Apparently, I'm causing his camera to vibrate, ruining his shots of the shark dead ahead. So he lightly whacks me alongside my head with the camera to get me to settle down. Fortunately, my scream, which underwater sounds more like a weak squeak, frightens the shark beneath us. In complete panic, it reverses directions and plunges down back into the dark depths below. I breathe a deep sigh of relief, which elicits another crack on the head from Michelle's camera. He is now using my shoulder as a camera rest. So he wants me to hold abruptly, absolutely still. Trying to breathe softly without moving is beginning to cause my faceplate to fog up. Through the mask's reduced visibility, I see Peaches patrolling in a tight circle around the lightweight cylinder. In anger and frustration, she gives it a mighty whack with her snout. The impact rocks the plastic cage, causing the tuna inside to bounce about enticingly. The swaying fish is too much of a temptation for a 14-foot long great white cruising below our cage. It makes a sudden rush for the dancing tuna. Peaches races to head off the smaller intruder, who quickly turns away and flees back toward the bottom. Boldly, another shark, a 15-foot long male, rockets out of the gloomy water straight at the cylinder. Peaches instantly reverses direction and charges the 15-foot long shark, which immediately turns away and bolts straight downward towards our open door. When leaning out into open water with a large movie camera resting on your shoulder, it is an amazing sensation to see a huge great white shark hurling at you from only a dozen feet away. From a diver's perspective, things always take longer underwater. In order for Michelle to leap backward into the safety of the cage, he must first begin the motion by leaning in the opposite direction. While both hands are occupied with a heavy camera, then get a good purchase with his rubber booties to push off forcefully to overcome the resistance of water pressure. Try this in a swimming pool. Stand on the bottom and lean forward with a hefty rock in your hand. Then see how long it takes before you can reverse your lean and push off in the opposite direction. Next, consider that the door is fully open. I must anchor myself with my knees on the cage floor and pull the door closed against water resistance over a full arch of 180 degrees. All of these actions take place in about 2 very long seconds, while my faceplate is rapidly filling with jaws wide open, charging Super Predator. A bare instant after the door slams closed, it is about to be impacted by a furious 15-foot long shark. Staring wide eyed through the wire mesh, I see the shark's eyes roll back as he extends his jaws and crashes into the door. My faceplate is only inches from the shark's snout. The thin steel shudders under the massive impact. The gigantic tail swishes from side to side as the shark bites down on the door and begins to shake it furiously. At the moment, what is bothering me the most is that I haven't yet latched the door closed. This means I can't let go of the steel mesh. Otherwise, the shark might jerk the door open and rip it off. Barely 2 inches from my finger are some startlingly large teeth attached to a very perturbed shark. It shakes the door vigorously, grinding off several layers of paint and rattling the whole cage like a hobo with a tin cup looking for a handout. After several seconds of whirring the door, the enraged shark releases its toothy grip, but it is only so he can get a better bite. I quickly let go while he prepares to reset his chompers a little more in my direction. I see the upper jaw dislocate in anticipation of the bigger bite. The serrated teeth flash in the gloomy light as he chomps down into the wire mesh. Quickly, I grab the outer edge of the door with one hand, then reach urgently for the latch with the other hand. I'm about to slam the latch home when another shark crashes into the opposite side of the cage. There are now two sharks shaking the cage between them. Almost by accident, I feel my gloved hand slide the latch into its slot. Retreating toward the center of the cage, I feel Michel's camera sliding back over my shoulder. Then he grips my arm with his now free hand as to signal to remain absolutely still. On my knees, with my heart pounding wildly, I watch the shark before me abandon its attack and abruptly depart in favor of circling the frozen tuna. Taking a deep breath out of my regulator, I turn to look at Michel and see that he is laughing. I find his good mood a little irritating and motion with my thumb that we should open the top hatch so I can talk with him about it. Dripping water, we emerge from the slightly battered cage. Michel is in high spirits. You look quite funny trying to hold that door closed with a shark chewing on it. Why didn't you help me? I asked, indulging my exasperation. I was catching it all on film, grins Michel. What if he had gotten the door open? I respond. Well, I guess I would have gotten that on film too, he laughs. I was using a wide angle lens, so it would have been a great close up. I can't help laughing with him. Did you see the size of those teeth? I could feel the steel vibrating as he ripped and tore at the wire mesh. Hey, Jean Michel brings our discussion to an abrupt end. If you two don't mind, we're supposed to be conducting an experiment to see how a great white reacts to an apparently cageless diver. What about the tuna test? I asked skeptically. Don't you think we should leave it in the cage for just a little longer? Nah, it's okay. Jean Michel is anxious to begin his experiment. I think we're ready for the human bait. In building the world's first all plastic shark cage, it is understandable that there might be a few flaws in the design. The cylinder's height, 10 feet, prevents me from being able to climb into it on the boat. The thin plastic cage also can't withstand a sharp blow against the side of the Alcyon's metal hull. That means it must be lowered quickly into the water well beneath the thread of the metal hull. That leaves only one way for me to get into the cylinder. I have to jump in and swim down to it. A few minutes later, standing at the stern of the Windship, staring down into what I distinctly know is shark infested water, I momentarily consider the wisdom of what I'm about to do. I have no intention of jumping in when a great white is present in the close sense. Underwater, Michel and the other divers are watching the circling great white sharks. A single hand protruding from the top of the steel cage motions with a thumbs up gesture that it's okay for me to jump. Yet I still hesitate. The thumb, it happens to be attached to Kapkan, who really likes to give me a hard time. Signals again. Jump! Realizing I'm not being paid enough for this job, I take a deep breath from the regulator and leap outwards. It is less than a yard down to the water, so I arrive faster than I would like. An instant later, I find myself surrounded by a cloud of bubbles from my entry in a whole host of imagined sharks. Desperately, with my mask full of water from the awkward entry, I look for and see the top of my near transparent cage. Kicking frantically downward, I lunge for the hatch cover, throw it open, and pull myself urgently down into the dubious protection of the plastic cylinder. Inside the cage, I immediately feel better even though I'm still upside down. It takes a couple of clumsy moments to right myself and peer anxiously about, looking for the sharks I imagined were all around me. Instead, all I see is empty water. Off to one side, I notice Capkin and Michelle in their steel cage. Capkin is pantomiming my panicked entry, and Michelle is pretending to be a great white shark hiding behind him. I put my hands on my hips and give them the look, which probably loses some of its impact through a dive mask. But then I notice something really interesting through the faceplate. The ballistic arrival of Peaches. The massive shark arrows straight up from the depths. She is only a few feet away when she apparently notices that I'm not the 40-pound tuna. The disappointment brings her to an abrupt stop just inches away. Hovering, she appears to peer intently in my direction, possibly wondering if this isn't some kind of cruel joke or cruel trick. But there is no doubt about it. I'm not a dead, rotting fish. She makes one pass behind the cylinder, maybe to make sure I'm not hiding the tuna behind my back. Then, with a complete lack of interest, she swims away. And so ends our human bait experiment for the day. Chilled from a long day in the cold water, I signal an end to the day's diving. Removing my scuba regulator from my mouth, I use it to pump air into the flotation tanks from which my plastic cage hangs. The air bubbles displace the water inside the tanks, creating buoyancy, which lifts the cylinder to the surface. Opening the top hatch, I pull myself up and remove My dive mask. A large boil of bubbles rising to the right is followed an instant later by the buoyant arrival of a steel cage. The top hatch is thrown open as Michelle and Capkin emerge, laughing and pointing in my general direction. Capkin is in his best form as he shouts, "How does it feel to be less interesting than a dead fish?" "That was the most boring shark encounter I've ever seen," chimes in Michelle. "Couldn't you figure out some way to be at least something that looks like something that's a little interesting?" "Hold it. I'm not going to let my tormentors get away with this. Jumping into shark infested water wasn't interesting. Maybe you should have tried moving your flippers in a more inviting way," offers Capkin. The conversation might have gone in many interesting directions from there, but Bruno, the chef, steps out on deck and rings the dinner bell. There is instant, frantic activity as everyone works extra fast to get the gear stowed. I, however, will have to patiently wait in the cold water. First, the steel cage has to be emptied of equipment, then lifted onto the deck with the stern crane and lashed into place. It will be around 15 minutes before the crane is available to pull out my cylinder. So I redon my dive mask and slip back below the chilly water. Cold and alone, but for a couple of leatherback fish nibbling on my rubber booties. I paused to think about the long journey that brought me to the Cousteau Society and this wonderful opportunity to be live bait for great white sharks in Dangerous Reef, Australia. It all really began when I was 13 years old. That's when I realized that my childhood dreams were actually attainable, but it was going to take a lot of hard work in the development of some specialized skills. If the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed, but skill will bring success. Ecclesiastes 10:10.